इस वीडियो में हम देखेंगे कि डॉकर क्या है और हम डॉकर को कैसे यूज़ करते हैं। और वी विल ऑल्सो क्रिएट अ स्मॉल एप्लीकेशन जिसमें हम एक डॉकर फाइल क्रिएट करेंगे एंड विद द हेल्प ऑफ दैट डॉकर फाइल वी विल रन आवर एप्लीकेशन इन अ डॉकर कंटेनर। सो लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड। तो सबसे पहले सवाल आता है व्हाट इज़ डॉकर। सो डॉकर इज़ एन ओपन सोर्स कंटेनराइजेशन प्लेटफॉर्म by which we can pack our application and all its dependencies into a standardized unit called container. तो डॉकर क्या है? ये एक ओपन सोर्स कंटेनराइजेशन प्लेटफॉर्म है। हम देखेंगे कि कंटेनराइजेशन क्या होता है इसी वीडियो में। बट डॉकर हमें हेल्प कैसे करता है? तो ये हेल्प करता है बाय पैकेजिंग आवर एप्लीकेशन एंड इट्स डिपेंडेंसीज। बट ये पैकेजिंग क्यों इम्पॉर्टेंट है? ये हमें हेल्प कैसे करता है? तो कई बार आप इस सिचुएशन में आए होंगे जब आपका एप्लीकेशन आपके सिस्टम पे तो चल रहा है, बट व्हेन यू शेयर योर एप्लीकेशन विथ योर कलीग और फ्रेंड्स, तो उनके सिस्टम पे ये एप्लीकेशन नहीं चल पाता। मे बी आपने कोड में कोई फाइल सिस्टम यूज़ कर रखा हो जो दूसरे सिस्टम पे अवेलेबल ना हो, या फिर कोई डिपेंडेंसी डाउनलोडेड ना हो, या फिर खुद ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम के डिफरेंस के कारण कोई इशू हो। तो we can avoid such problems by packing our application into what we call a Docker image, and then we can run this image on the host computers through Docker containers. In that case, we can avoid such issues because we are not sharing our code only. We are sharing its dependencies and all the requirements of the application to run in an environment. Okay. तो नेक्स्ट ये है कि डॉकर वर्क कैसे करता है। तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वी क्रिएट अ डॉकर फाइल इन द एप्लीकेशन इटसेल्फ टू पैक आवर एप्लीकेशन। we give all the commands that we need to pack our code into this docker file, and then we build a docker image with this docker file. Okay, and after building this image we run this image in a docker container. So the only prerequisite here is that the host computer should have docker installed. Okay, so moving forward we will also demonstrate the working of this docker with a node application. तो इसमें हम क्या क्या स्टेप्स यूज़ करेंगे? तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वी विल क्रिएट अ नोड ऐप, मे बी अ सिंपल एक्सप्रेस ऐप। देन वी विल क्रिएट द डॉकर फाइल, और फिर उस डॉकर फाइल से हम इमेज बिल्ड करेंगे। देन वी विल रन दैट इमेज इन अ कंटेनर, and then we will validate that our app is working or not through the container. So let's get started and let's move for creating a express app. ओके, तो हमने यहाँ पर एक नोड ऐप बना लिया है और इस पे हमने एक एक्सप्रेस सर्वर रन किया है जो पोर्ट 3000 पे लिसन कर रहा है। एंड वी हैव ऑल्सो क्रिएटेड अ API, गेट API स्लैश क्रेडेंशियल्स, जो कि एक सिंपली एक जेसन स्ट्रिंगिफाई ऑब्जेक्ट रिटर्न कर रहा है जिसमें हम यूज़र नेम और पासवर्ड रिटर्न कर रहे हैं। तो लेट्स सी ये ऐप हमारे लोकल सर्वर पे रन कर रहा है या नहीं। Server has started on port 3000. Let's go hit the terminal. Okay, we can also use the browser here and Let's see, are we listening? So which one? Localhost slash credentials. Yes, we can get, we are getting the response as username as admin and password as pass. So that's what we that is what we expected to return the application. Okay, so the app is created. Now we must create the whole important Docker file, and we will be creating that Docker file at the root of our application, and let's name this as Docker file. Now we will go through each steps we must perform in this Docker file, and then we will go with the commands for each steps. Okay, so first list down all the steps that we need to perform in this Docker file. Okay, so the first step will be fetching the base image. So we must give some configurations related to operating systems and some basic configurations related to node in this base image. Okay, after fetching this base image, we will be required to create a working directory. Okay, so we will be creating a working directory within the container. Then we should copy the dependencies. Okay, so after creating the working directory, we will copy all the dependencies there. Then we will install the dependencies. Okay, so all the dependencies are installed, but we have not copied our code. So the main logic or the code will be copied in the container. So we must copy the code, and finally our dependencies are installed, all the code is copied, so we must start the application within the container. Okay, so for fetching the base image we will be using from command, and we have to give the base image. So here we will use node alpine as our base image. Then we will be creating the working directory. So for creating the working directory we will use work dir command, and we have to give the working directory path. So let's use express app. Then we have to copy the dependencies. So for copy we use copy command, and we have to give source and destination. So the source for the dependencies will be our package.json, and the destination will be what, the working directory that we have just created in the container. Then for installing the dependencies we have to give this run command, and the command for that will be npm install. Okay, now we have to copy the code. So here we will use again the copy command, and the source will be our index.js, because that is all the code we have in this application. But if you have more code, like you have a folder, then you can pass the folder path as well. And in the destination we will again use express app. Then for starting the application we will use cmd command, and we have to pass executables here. Okay, so each command can be break into separate keywords, and those keywords will be used as executable, and we have to pass the list for this executable. So for us the command should be like node index.js. So the first executable will be node, and then second executable will be index.js. Okay, so we have created our docker file. Let's save it, and now let's try to build a docker image with this docker file. So to create the image we will be using docker build command, and we can pass a tag which will which will contain the name and the version for this docker image. Let's give name as express image, and tag will be 1.0.0 like version. Then we will have to pass the context. So context is this, like the working directory. So we are giving context as working directory because we are giving docker access to all the files which is present in our working directory, where he can apply the build command. Okay, so let's try to build this image. Okay, permission denied, so I must use sudo on my system. Give my password. Okay, so the Docker image creation has been started. Let's wait for a few seconds and see our Docker image gets created or not. Okay, so here you can see our Docker is created, and you can see there are few steps that has been performed here. There are total 5 steps. So the first step will be pulling the base image, and here you can see it has it has cached this. Otherwise, if you are downloading it for the first time, then it can take some time. Then you can see all the steps one by one, these are performed. And now let's verify our Docker image has been created or not in the Docker desktop app. So here you can see in the Docker desktop there is an express image with tag 1.0.0 has been created just 0 seconds ago. It will be refreshed after a few seconds. So you can see we have created a Docker image successfully. Now the next step is to run this Docker image in a Docker container. So for running the image, we will be using docker run command. Then there is a port mapping which must be done to run an image in a container. Okay, so why this mapping is important? So let's start mapping the port. So here port mapping is important because we have to map a host port to the container's port, so that we can access the port of the container on which our service is running on our local system as well. Okay, so for example, let's put our host port as 3001 and the container port as 300. Why 300? Because our app is running on port 3000 in the container. So we will be mapping the port 3001 of our local host to the port 3000 to the container. Okay, then we can also provide name to this container. Let's give a name as express container, and then we have to pass the image with on which this container will be running. Okay, so the image that we created was express image, and the tag was 1.0.0. okay, so it says unable to find. Okay, so there is some typo here, so it should be express image. Okay, so you can see we got the log server has started on port 3000. It means our container has been started. We can also verify this on Docker desktop. So you can see express container is up. Okay, now let's go to the browser and see our app is working or not. Okay, so earlier we saw that on 3000 port we were getting the desired results, but now you can see on 3000 we get nothing because on the local host on port 3000 nothing is running. Okay, but if we try it with localhost 3001, you see we get the desired results. Okay, so that means we were able to map our port 3001 to the containers port 3000, and we are able to see the desired results. Okay, so that's what I had to share in this video. If you found this video useful and you learned something new, then please like, share and subscribe, and thank you for joining me on this video. Thanks a lot.